Good afternoon. We're in the middle of a Mishna, but before we start, I just want to mention that this Sunday we're going to be talking about from destruction to redemption, the story and life lessons from the destruction of the Holy Temple, and hopefully, with Hashem's help, the focus will be on redemption, not on destruction. That'll be Sunday, Mirz Hashem, at 11 in the morning. We're in the middle of a Mishnah, Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 7, talking about things that the more that you have of certain things, the more problems you have. The more you have of positive things, the more blessings you have. So we'll pick up where we left, I think we left off, where it talks about the more wives, the more witchcraft. The simple meaning is, and there's always a deeper understanding of it, but the simple meaning is that if you have more wives, then they're going to be fighting against each other, and they're going to use every method, including witchcraft, if they have that capacity. They'll do everything legal and illegal to try to destroy the other wife, the co-wife, because they want their husband to want them exclusively. So it's not a good idea. And if people thought that maybe having more wives, you have more help in the house, you have more support, it's not going to work. Don't even think about it. Now, it's interesting that in Hebrew, I mentioned this last week also, in Hebrew, the word to describe your co-wife, your sister you call my sister, what do you call your co-wife? And it has to be polite language. No, your co-wife is called a tzara, your misfortune, your problem, your downfall, your everything negative. That's just one word that describes everything negative. It's going to lead to a tremendous amount of strife, and it's not a very healthy situation. So much so that the Torah, when it talks about forbidden relationships, you're not allowed to marry two sisters. Even if one sister you divorce, you can't marry her sister as long as the sister was alive. And the reason given in the Torah in one word, litzror, you can't marry two sisters, to make them into rivals, into tzarot, into misfortunes for one another. Why is it about two sisters? Because sisters have natural love for one another. There's probably no relationships that are closer than two sisters. And when you marry both sisters, you're going to create enmity between them. That's why the Torah says, do not marry two sisters. Even though you could marry more than one wife, or if the wife is divorced, you could always marry another woman, but not two sisters, because it destroys a loving relationship. But the Torah allowed for polygamy, even though it was frowned upon. The Talmud says, and it uses a metaphor, it's a metaphor, but it's literal, that if you have two wives, one is older, one is younger. So what happens with the older one? She sees your black hair, she pulls out the black hairs because she doesn't want you to look younger than her. What does the younger wife do? She sees your white hair, she doesn't want to have a husband who looks old, so she pulls out his white hair. So what are you left with? You're bald. That's of course a metaphor. It doesn't necessarily mean literally they're going to pull out your hairs, although that can happen, of course. But it means when you have, in contemporary society, you have the older people who are more traditional, and they like the more traditional ways of doing things, and the younger generation likes to experiment with new things, and modernity changes things. So if you have two wives, one wife will be the traditional one, and she'll fight you when you try to engage in anything that's not traditional, and the modern one will fight you when it comes to doing traditional things. It's going to be a disaster.
Is it ach and achot? Ach and achot?
Ach and achot means brother and sister. Here we're talking about two wives, two co-wives. Now, just to explain what happened, why is there permission to marry more than one wife, but a woman cannot marry more than one husband? That's called adultery. That's a capital crime in Judaism. Yet, to marry more than one wife, that is permissible by Jewish law based on the Torah, and even in the Talmud does not have any proscription, any prohibition against marrying two wives, although it was frowned upon, and it's hard to find any rabbi in the Talmudic period who had more than one wife. So it was generally not something that was practiced. In the Torah, we also find Abraham married two wives, but only after he was married for many years and had no children that he was told by his wife to marry Hagar. Isaac had one wife, Rivka. Yaakov planned on marrying one wife, but he ended up with four. That wasn't his plan. So those were sisters, and that's a question that's asked. How could he have married two sisters when the Torah prohibits it? But this is before the Torah was given, but it says that the patriarchs kept the whole Torah, so how could he marry two? But that's a separate topic for another time. Moses married one wife, Tzipporah. Yes?
So when a man dies, the wife is encouraged to marry his brother to have...
If a man dies and they're childless, then she's obligated to either marry her husband's brother or to go through a ceremony called chalitza.
So the opposite,
But
if the woman dies, the man is allowed to marry her sister?
he's allowed to, yes. He doesn't have to, but he's allowed to. So what's the difference between polygamy, which was eventually outlawed by Rabenu Gershom? Rabenu Gershom was the greatest Ashkenazic authority who lived a little over 1,000 years ago in Germany, and he banned polygamy. There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or it's true, that he had two wives and he suffered, and he realized that it's not a good idea. But you don't have to be married to two wives to recognize it's not a great idea. I think people could figure that out on their own. But nevertheless, the Torah did not prohibit that, and Sephardic Jews never accepted that ban, most Sephardic Jews. And to this day, that you can still find Iranian Jews and other non-Ashkenazic Jews that will marry more than one wife. Israel doesn't allow it, so if anyone came to Israel, they were married to more than one wife, they can still keep the two wives or more than two wives. But otherwise, they don't allow polygamy. But what's the reason? What? They do allow polygamy?
Just saying for Jews. No. The Arabs have.
Oh, the Arabs can do it.
One time, and then they divorce them, marry another four, and then they divorce them and marry another four.
Okay.
And the government pays support for all the kids.
They do that in Israel? Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, so Israel only discriminates against Jews, I guess. But I think it's not a discrimination, it's a support for them. It avoids a lot of tsaros. So let me try to give you a theory that I have about why polygamy was never outrightly condemned. It was prohibited eventually by Rabenu Gershom. But adultery is a capital crime. It's one of the 10 Commandments. So the concept goes like this. When God created Adam, He created him from the earth. In other words, and that's why he's called Adam, min ha'adama, from the earth. That means Adam is essentially an earthy being. Then, what does God do? He takes a part of Adam, a rib or a side, whatever, and he creates Eve. So Adam now, in addition to the fact that Adam, the male, it comes from the earth, he has a greater leaning towards materialistic existence. Not only that, but he lost part of himself. Part of his body was taken away from him. So a male, from the very beginning of creation, is a defective being.
They have enough self-image.
I came to class to hear this.
Okay, all the men are going to boycott this class now. A male has deficiencies, and a male therefore looks for marriage to perfect himself, to make up for the things that he lost. The Talmud actually uses this metaphor. Why is it the custom that the man, again this is the custom, it's not a law, that the man is the one who looks for his spouse rather than the woman looking for her spouse? Because if you lose something, who searches for which? Do you search for the thing that you lost, or the thing that you lost searches for you? obviously you search for the thing that you lost. So the man lost Eve. He lost a part of his body that became Eve, so a man has to look for his spouse. But it's more than just a cute little thing about looking for the thing that you lost. It's something that tells you that a male has certain gaps that by design, God created a male that way because he wants us to work on ourselves, to perfect ourselves, and the way to do it, the ideal way to do it, is through marriage. Not everyone is successful.
Shalom.
Not everyone is complete. Shalom is complete. Not everyone gets married, and you can't condemn anyone because of that, and they can develop collateral ways of perfecting themselves, but the natural way of self-perfection for a male is through marriage. Now, sometimes a man has more than one deficiency, more than one gap, more than one defect. And it could be that if he marries one wife, that will only correct one aspect of his personality, but he has more than one aspect. So the Torah says, if that's the case, if you're able to marry two wives, and the two wives are not going to be enemies of each other, they're not going to try to destroy themselves, each other, or destroy you, because they think that you're showing favoritism, then if that's the case, then you could do that. A man could perfect himself with more than one spouse. But the other way it doesn't work, because Eve was created as an independent being. And she was not created from the earth. She was created from a human being. She was already perfected to a greater extent. Of course, no human being is perfect. Every human being has room to grow and to perfect themselves. But we're talking about relatively speaking. The woman has an independent identity and doesn't need the man for marriage. In terms of fulfilling her identity, in terms of becoming complete. She is complete as one would want to be when they're in their creation. And marriage for a woman is a certain form of sacrifice, that she's willing to surrender her independence because she wants to nurture another person. So for a male, the marriage is primarily to self-perfection. In addition to that, the male also has to surrender and sacrifice of himself for his spouse and for his family, obviously. But that's a secondary thing. One second. But for the woman, it's the other way around. Her primary focus on marriage and her major focus on marriage is to surrender her independence to nurture another human being. So she doesn't need the male for marriage to become complete. Now, in order to motivate a woman to want to get married, because many women would say, "Why should I get married? I'm independent. I don't need a male." So God created a system in which the male is more likely to provide sustenance and security. So there's an economic and a security motivation that makes women depend on the male to a certain extent, and they should want to get married. But a woman cannot, I want to just finish off this thought. If a woman marries more than one husband, that means her sacrifice is compromised. Her marriage is not for self-perfection where there's room for more than one. Her marriage is for self-surrender, giving of herself for the other, and that has to be exclusive. That has to be total. Yes?
I was just going to say, is there a relationship between Chaya and like Shorish, like Chaya is a Shorish, a root into the divine where the feminine interprets for the masculine in the spiritual realms that the masculine cannot see? And also...
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Let's start all over.
Adam and Eve.
Chava, which is similar to Chaya, yes.
Yeah. Right, I forgot that. So isn't that she's rooted in the divine, like naturally a spiritual interpreter for the masculine? Isn't that one of the blending of the masculine and the feminine, that the feminine becomes a kind of interpreter of the spiritual realms?
Yes, the man also has a spiritual source. We both have spiritual sources, but they're different kinds of spiritual sources. So in the case of the woman, she is on the receiving end in order for her to motivate her to want to be on the giving end. And how does she give? She gives through selflessness. The feminine is the model for selflessness. In Kabbalistic terminology, the feminine is malchus. Malchus is the 10th attribute, which has nothing of its own, but it absorbs everything. It's like the moon. The moon has no light of its own, but it reflects the light of the sun. When you're in the mode of receiving, you're in a state of total surrender, which is a much more powerful force, ultimately. And that's why through marriage, the feminine contributes something very powerful to the masculine that the masculine can't have on his own.
But also, King David, the reasons for King David's many marriages was to provide for many who would not otherwise.
Okay, well, we'll get to King David and King Solomon in a moment. So, yes?
What about the woman would be obligated to marry?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. I didn't.
I said, in defense of a woman being obligated to be married, there's the mitzvah for who?
Women are not obligated, as strange as it may sound. Men are obligated to have children. Women are not obligated. And one of the reasons given is you don't need an obligation when it's something you want on your own. You're obligated to do things that you wouldn't do on your own. So the Torah does not obligate women to have children. She's not in violation of any law if she doesn't have. A man is in violation if he doesn't have children. Obviously, God is the one who controls whether you can have children or not, but you have to make the effort. And women don't have that obligation. So women do not really have to get married by Jewish law. They're not obligated. But when they do get married, that's giving of themselves. As I said before, they're independent beings and they're giving up on their independence because they have the desire to nurture others. And that's part of the feminine character. So, therefore, a woman cannot have more than one husband, but a man could have more than one.
Is that written somewhere?
What was what
In
written?
any Torah or anything, or any interpretation that a woman cannot have but a man can?
Back in the New York Times.
Is there a
It's in the Torah. The Torah tells you that men can have more than one wife, and a woman who has more than one husband is guilty of adultery. Now, I just want to add this caveat. People think that it's discriminatory to women that only a woman could commit adultery. No, that's not true. If a man marries more than one wife, it's not adultery. It's polygamy. But if a single man, has a relationship with a married woman, he is guilty of adultery, and it's a capital crime for him, no less so than if it is for the woman. So adultery applies to men and women, but in a different way than in modern society, the way it sees it. Yes?
Rabbi, is there an expectation at some point with the woman's nurturing that the man is going to there's going to be a positive response, and at some point that might, like he graduates, like graduation.
The hope is that the man will become a mensch.
Like even one child into the mix, children or aging parents or other things. And now the woman, is still dealing with the husband who, if he's always that level, and then there's children, and there's this and there's that, how successful she could be to carry that kind of load. So is there like an expectation that the husband at some point there would be a gradual kind of weaning off in time?
Weaning off what?
All the required nurturing that the woman must do for him?
Well, nurturing has many different levels. Nurturing could be cooking and providing the husband with food. That's also nurturing, but it's much deeper than that. It's nurturing is giving him spiritual energy, encouraging him to do more good. That's also nurturing, and that's a more important type of nurturing. Now, King David married 18 wives, and he was told he can't marry more than 18, and a king can have as many as he wants up till 18. King Solomon had 700 wives, and 300, as one child put it, porcupines. Oh, porcupines. That's what one child once said he came home from Hebrew school and he heard.
The king that came after with Bathsheba,
That was King David.
that was King David.
That was King David. It was
So when King Solomon have his son, that was King, I'm mixed up.
King Solomon had a son called Rechavam.
He was a bad guy.
He wasn't so smart. Let's put it that way.
Plain Pashut.
But King Solomon married 1,000 wives. Now the Torah clearly prohibits a king marrying more than 18. The Torah doesn't mention a number, it's based on an interpretation of a verse. So how comes King Solomon married 1,000 wives? So the reason given is that it was a political gesture. King Solomon wanted to solidify his power and his control over the whole world. Because King Solomon felt it was his responsibility as a Jewish king to bring the message of one God to the whole world. He didn't do it because he wanted power. He wanted the power to go to God. He built a holy temple. He wanted everyone to come to the temple. He wanted everyone to recognize the truth of Judaism and of Torah. He didn't want to convert everyone, but he thought the best way to do that is to marry women from all different backgrounds, from all different nations, including Queen of Sheba, and to solidify his power. The Kabbalists will go further that the whole purpose of existence, of human existence, is to liberate and elevate the sparks of holiness that exist throughout the world. And he felt that by taking women from different parts of the world and marrying them, that would help to liberate those sparks of holiness, and that would make the world a holier place. The problem with King Solomon was that the Torah says you're not allowed to. And that's what happens when people think that they are smarter than the Torah. And King Solomon said, you know why the Torah says you can't marry more than a certain number of wives? A king shouldn't have too many wives? Because they can turn him away from God. I don't have to worry about that. I will not be turned away from God. I'm going to be faithful no matter what. I'm strong enough. But when a person makes that calculation, that's a pitfall. There's a story in the Talmud of a great rabbi, Rabbi Yishmael, who was a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest rabbis of all times. And he was told by his colleagues, the rabbis made a law that you're not allowed to study Shabbos, Friday night, with an oil lamp, because there's always a danger that you might adjust the wick. If the flame isn't a good flame, you might try to add a little bit of oil, you might try to move the oil in the direction of the wick, you might try to adjust the wick, and that's called lighting a fire on Shabbos, which is against the laws of Shabbos. We're not allowed to light fire. So he said, the law is not intended for me, because I'm so conscientious that I will study Torah and I will not be tempted to adjust the flame. It won't happen. And what happened, there's two versions that he was about. One version is that he actually adjusted the flame and he violated Shabbos, and the other version is he was about to do that. And then he said, I realize how great the words of the sages are. When they make a law, it applies to everyone across the board. We're not allowed to say, I'm an exception to the law. That's even with rabbinic law. How much more so when it comes to the biblical laws, that a person can't say, the law was intended for the simple folk, for people who are on a lower level. I'm at such a high level, and King Solomon was the wisest person that ever lived. So you have to imagine that King Solomon understood more than the average person, and he was able to use his wisdom to know how to lead his life. But when he decided to do something that was contrary to Torah, even though he had a good rationale for him to do it, it blew up in his face, and his wives brought idolatry into the palace. Just on this subject, I want to just add one more thing. Rabenu Gershom, the rabbi who lived a little over 1,000 years ago, who banned polygamy, he is given a title that I don't know if anyone else in Jewish history was given that title. He's called Me'or Hagola, the luminary of the exile. He brought light to the exile. What is it about him that made him more of a luminary than, let's say, Rashi or Rambam or many of the others? There were hundreds of thousands of great rabbis who illuminated the exile. Why was he given that title? And the answer given, I don't know what the source of this is, but it's a famous answer, that Rabenu Gershom is known for many bans he instituted. One ban he instituted was, according to Torah law, a man could divorce his wife without her consent. The Torah allows for the husband to divorce his wife without her consent. And that's one of the reasons why we have a ketubah, the marriage contract, to deter the husband from divorcing his wife, because the ketubah is a financial obligation, and husbands could be cheap, and they're going to say, if I divorce my wife, I'm going to really have to pay a lot, like alimony in American law.
It's providing unmatched sharpness that lasts a lifetime.
So he instituted a law that says you cannot divorce your wife against her will. Yes?
Is that why a man has to give the wife the get?
The man gives the wife the get, right. As if he just takes the get, the bill of divorce, and puts it in her hand, and she doesn't want it, she's divorced. Puts it in her pocketbook, she's divorced. Right, but however it's done, but it doesn't require her consent. But now it does. Jewish law now says you absolutely have to have the wife's consent. That's one ban that he put on anyone who divorces his wife against her will. And the second famous, what?
Exceptions though, right? There are exceptions.
No, there are really no exceptions. Hetemei Rabbanim is the get has.
Their father divorced his wife from Russia because she refused to move to Israel, to Israel. And then he moved to Israel and married another woman and had 5 more kids.
Yeah, but there was a Hetemei Rabbanim, which is a wholly different concept. We'll talk about. No, you can't force a woman to take the get. You could find a way for the husband to remarry with 100 rabbis signing on a special document under certain conditions, and then the get has to be written and put in escrow. That whenever she's willing to take it, she gets the get. But the husband is allowed to remarry without the get. But that's a separate subject. We can have a whole class just on that.
The man, the Jewish men have so many more privileges from the woman.
No, the woman has more privileges than the man.
He can give divorce, the women cannot give divorce. He can do all that stuff.
Marry more than
What other stuff?
Huh?
Marry more than one wife? That's a privilege?
Might be a mistake, I don't know, but still.
It's not a privilege.
In an agricultural economy, it can be.
Rabbi, I have a question, and I'm just curious, which overrides what? 2 people get married, 7 years go by, and they don't have children.
10.
Okay? And let's say it's the man that's sterile. Let's just, for a more specific situation, it's the man that's sterile, not the woman. So the woman says, look, this is the situation. You've been married 7 years. You've been told you're sterile. I want children, so I want a divorce. If the husband says, well, I'm not going to divorce you, I'm not going to give you a get, does her wanting the children after so many years, because they can't have children because of him, does that override the situation of not getting the get? Which is more powerful?
No, she can't get married unless she has the get or unless her husband dies. But murder is against the Jewish law, so the only legitimate.
Killing me with this.
So let's get back. Let's finish this thought over here, and we'll get off the subject of polygamy. Rabenu Gershom made those 2 bans. He made a lot of other bans, but these are the 2 famous ones. And this is considered to be a metaphor for God's relationship with the Jewish people in exile. God sent us into exile. It's like a husband who sends his wife away. They get a separation. And there's always a fear when there's a separation that it might lead to a divorce. So Rabenu Gershom said, no, God, you can't divorce us against our will, because Rabenu Gershom put a ban on divorcing a woman against her will. So that saves us in exile, because if it wasn't for that, God could say, you know what, we had the separation long enough, let's get divorced. And we don't have a say in that matter if we be pre-Rabenu Gershom. Once Rabenu Gershom came along, that made sure that God cannot divorce us. No matter how bad we may be, and we're not bad, but no matter how bad we may be, God will never divorce the Jewish people. But then there's another fear. God will say, okay, I can't divorce you, but I'll marry another wife. I'll take another nation. I'll take the Italians. I'll take the French. I'll take the whoever. So you won't be my only wife, my only partner. So Rabenu Gershom says, no, you can't do that. You can't marry more than one wife. So that illuminated the exile. That made the exile more acceptable to us, that we could survive in exile, because who knows what would have happened to us if God would have divorced us, or he would have accepted another nation to be his people, his chosen people. So that's why Rabenu Gershom got the title, the luminary of exile. He brought light and blessing to the exile through his enactments. Another deeper way of understanding this idea that marrying many wives, that a wife is a metaphor for wisdom, for different disciplines of wisdom. In the book of Proverbs, when King Solomon speaks about women of valor, one of the interpretations that he's referring to the wisdom of Torah. The Torah is called our spouse, our wife. Even if you're a woman, the Torah is your spouse. So the idea of having many wives means that you have many disciplines, many philosophies. Yeah, I dabble in Torah, I dabble in philosophy, I dabble in science, I dabble in poetry, there are many disciplines in this world. He says it's dangerous to commit yourself to marry many disciplines. You're married to only one discipline, and that's the Torah. Yes, could you use science? Yes, you could use science, because science could help us live our lives and have better lives. And the better lives means we have a better way of observing the Torah and follow its commandments. But if you marry more than one spouse, it means that you're committed to other ideologies and other philosophies. That's dangerous. That could lead to sorcery. What does that mean, sorcery? Sorcery could be a metaphor here. Sorcery means the extreme use of evil. Sorcery, the Torah forbids sorcery. Why? Because it's connected to the forces of evil. Sorcery is not, great rabbis performed miracles, but it wasn't sorcery because they used the divine, spiritual, positive energy. Sorcerers use negative energy to do their tricks. I'm not talking about modern day magicians that are not real sorcerers. So when it talks about marrying more than one wife, it's referring to being married to other ideologies. And there are people who give up their Judaism, but there are people who say, I want to keep my Judaism. It's one ideology among many, but I also want to be committed and married to other ideologies. That's dangerous because it could lead to all sorts of negative consequences. It could lead to evil. And there are different kinds. And what does the Mishna say when you have more than one wife? It could lead to more sorcery, more evil. There's a midrash that says when King Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, the angel Gabriel took a reed, and he planted it in the sea, and he created Rome. What does that mean? Metaphorically, what does it mean? It means that Rome, which is the source of all of our problems, the second temple was destroyed by Rome, and we still haven't recovered from what Rome did then. Even though the Romans today are not in power, the Catholic Church is no longer a major power, but the destruction of the temple by the Romans led to all the subsequent empires that conquered us, the Greeks, the Persians, the Greeks, the Ottomans, and now the Americans. People who say, and this is parenthetical, people who say that they sing the words, the Hatikva, Lias Am Chavshi, we're a free nation in our land. No, we're not. They celebrate Yom HaTzmaut, Independence Day. No, it's not. Israel is not independent. Israel's not an independent country. As soon as Trump said no more bombing in Iran, even though it was in the middle of what they were doing, they stopped. Israel can't do anything against what America, and this has always been the case, but especially now. And thank God that Trump, his instincts are good for mostly for Israel. But I said mostly because not everything that he does was. Israel's not an independent country. We'll only have true independence when Mashiach comes. So we lost our independence through the destruction of the Second Temple. And that was all caused, the seeds for that were sown when King Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh. In other words, when he thought erroneously that he's going to strengthen Judaism and by bringing in women from other countries, from other cultures, and is going to share Judaism with other cultures, that was the beginning of the end. That was the beginning of the destruction. The Hebrew word for reed is kaneh. The opening letter, the initial is a letter kuf. What's unique about the letter kuf? The Zohar describes that it's a symbol of negativity. A kuf has a horizontal roof, a vertical line on the right, and the letter Hey has another vertical line on the left that goes as far down as the one on the right. The kuf takes the vertical line on the left and drags it down. When you go down into the abyss, when you go down into the lowest realms and you're not connected above, you're going to get lost. It'll be a disaster. In other words, when people say, there are people who said, I'm going to do things, compromise on my Judaism, because I want to bring Judaism to people who are not observant, and the only way I can do that is if I compromise my own Judaism. So you're going down into the what's the good word for that?
Abyss.
I said abyss already. I'm looking for another word. into the quagmire.
The quagmire, yeah, quagmire.
I had to pay special to use that word. You know, if you go into the quagmire, into the lowest of realms, you better be connected up to the upstairs, because if you're not connected, you're going to fall. You'll get lost. And this happened in our generation also. There were many rabbis who were well-intentioned, who decided we want to get more Jews involved in Judaism, but if I come and if I'm dressed like a chassid, if I behave in accordance with Jewish law, if I keep every mitzvah and all the restrictions of Judaism, I'm not going to reach them. They won't want to relate to me. So I have to change my own ways and water them down. And these people meant well, but what happened is they were like the kuf, they were like the reed that was planted from which Rome developed. That means that you're just institutionalizing the golus, the exile.
What was the point of the malach? Did that?
What it means is that where did the power for exile come? It came when King Solomon was at the height of his spiritual growth. That's where the power, the seeds were sown for the eventual exile. That means when you compromise, when you're on the highest level and you say, I'm going to make a little compromise here, you're sowing seeds for a much greater destruction and devastation that comes later. Just reminded myself of a famous story. There was a great Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Meir of Primishlan. And this rabbi was known to be a miracle worker. He was a very holy man. And in the winter, there was a hill that was so icy that no one was able to climb that hill. And he would go to the mikveh, he would climb that hill, go up and down, and nothing ever happened to him. So people were saying, you know why? Because the rabbi is a holy man, so no mishap would occur. So one wise guy said, you know what? I don't believe in all this stuff, because I'm going to go climb this hill in the winter with all the slippery slopes there, and nothing's going to happen to me. If he could do it, I can do it. I'm younger than him, I'm more agile, I'm more athletic, I can do it. And of course, he tried climbing, and he fell down, and he broke a few bones, and he was bandaged from head to toe. And then he realized that the rabbi was a different person. So he comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, how did you do it? What was your trick? He says, when you're tied up above, you don't fall down. But even when you're going down a slippery slope, if you're connected above, you're not going to fall down. And I'll just share a little anecdote. I was a witness to this. We're a group of Satmar Hasidim. Satmar was very opposed to Chabad's outreach. And they were going to have an audience with the Rebbe, where they were going to present their challenges to the Rebbe. And meanwhile, they were discussing with other rabbis they were having a debate with a Chabad rabbi. And they said, we're against this whole idea of outreach. He says, why? Because it's very dangerous. You're observant, and you're going to start going to communities where people are not observant, where you don't have the availability of all the things that you need to maintain your spiritual level. There's a danger that you could be influenced by them. And they said, I remember they said, the greatest challenge that a person has is peer pressure. The greatest influence in our lives is we can't be different from our peers. They influence us. And therefore, when you go out to these deserted Jewish communities, isolated Jewish communities, you're putting your lives, your spiritual lives in danger. And I remember the rabbi who responded to them, Rabbi Shem Tov, said to this, happened about 60 years ago. He said to them, you're right, you're 100% right. That's why you have to be connected to the source. If you're connected to the source, if you're connected to the Rebbe, then you can go anywhere and you won't be affected. If you're not connected to the source, you're right. You shouldn't do it. If you're not connected, you're not going to succeed in doing it. So what King Solomon did was he wasn't connected. He did something that didn't connect him to the source, because God says, no, don't have many wives. And because he wasn't connected, and he tried going down in order to elevate those who were down there. That was his intention. It wasn't because he was an addict, a sex addict. It's because he wanted to go down to elevate the world, but he didn't do it with a connection to the one above, thinking that he doesn't need it. And that's the smartest guy in the world, right? He was the smartest person in the world. So being he was the smartest person in the world, and because he was smart, that's why he fell. If he wasn't so smart, being smart is not always an asset. Too smart.
How many children?
Everything in moderation.
I don't know how many children. I don't know if it says how many children he had, but the one son who succeeded him, Rechavam, well, actually, his mother was an Ammonite. She was a convert to Judaism, just like Rus was a convert to Judaism. She was the great-grandmother of King David. So the whole dynasty of King Solomon comes from the two nations, Ammon and Moab. We weren't allowed to destroy them because they were going to produce the women who were going to produce the kings that would lead to Mashiach. Okay, any questions? We'll have to conclude this Mishna next week. We still have a lot more to do.
Thank you.
Was there